Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sebbing. Today we have a replay of one of my very first quilt designs and the pattern and everything to go with it, and that's Stars and Stripes. So long before Quilt Addicts Anonymous was what you know it to be today, I was operating it out of my sunroom, and I would do what was called fabric exchanges because we didn't sell physical products besides that. So people would purchase their own fabric of two colors, cut it up, send it in, and me and a couple of college kids would mix it all up so that you got a little bit of everything, and then I would send that in the backing or background out to everybody. And let me tell you, this was the last one we did because it broke me, because not everybody cuts the same. And there were definitely some log cabin strips that looked like they had been cut with like shears and not a rotary cutter. And it was so many pieces, and I hired two college kids to come in and help me sort it all. I think I actually have a picture of my daughter, who was I think 2 or 3 at the time, helping. And it was too much. And after this, I was like, okay, no more fabric exchanges. And after that, we started to actually sell some fabric. But it's a really fun quilt. It's great for if you want a patriotic quilt. It also meets the requirements of a Quilt of Valor in terms of its size. And it is my favorite block combination ever, and that's a combination of a sawtooth star and a log cabin. And so half of your log cabin is a red stripe, and half of the log cabin is white background, and then in the center you have a blue star. And it looks so fun, and it kind of has this like wave design for the setting, so it looks like, you know, a flag waving in the wind. And we've got some borders, and so it really shows off. In this case, we're going to use a sort of fireworks fabric. But for the first time ever, we brought in actual patriotic fabric. We normally stick just to contemporary and modern fabric, and I have yet to see a contemporary and modern patriotic line, but Patrick Lose came out with a really cool patriotic line for this year. So I figured, let's give it a go. Let's order this and let's see if you guys like it. I bet you guys will. And we have 2 variations on this. What is going to change between the variation is going to be your first border and your binding. So we're going to take a peek at the fabrics. And before I do that, I actually want to show you this really cool panel that came with it. This is not in any of the kits, and we have a couple of fabrics too that are not included in the kits, so there's plenty of yardage there to go for your backing fabric. If you just want to get everything all together, you can do that. But this was a really fun, it's a panel, and it is like an instant table runner. So you cut it, and you can see that it's a runner center. And so it has this really cool, it looks like half square triangles, and it is made from like the same fabrics that are in the line. So you can get some coordinating fabrics for your binding and your backing really easily for this. But you're just gonna cut out your center and follow that. And then you're gonna cut out your ends. And so all you have to do is cut out your ends and your center and stitch them to each other. And then you have an instant table runner that looks like it's been pieced. I mean, look at this. It looks like you appliqued all those stars on, but you are like with 3 seams, 2 seams, because when we just sewing the ends on, you have an instant table runner that's ready to quilt. So it's great for practicing that free motion quilting on. You could make it look like you were stitching the niche by going on the diagonals here, but it really is very fun. This would be really easy to get done and out on your table for this 4th of July. We only have a limited number of these because we only have 1 bolt of it, so they might go fast, but they're really super fun. So this is an awesome one, and it would coordinate with your quilt, so that'll be fun too. Before we take a peek at the different fabrics that are in the kit, I just want to say that this video was filmed before I discovered the beauty of pressing your seams open. So you're going to be told to press seams under in the tutorial and in the pattern, but what I recommend to do now is to press everything open, because it just gets a much more flat block, and it stays truer to size, which is really important when you're doing a log cabin, because they tend to shrink up on you the more and more strips that you add. So let's take a peek at these fabrics, and they're so fun. So for this one, we need a few red fabrics for our stripes in our log cabin strips, and then we need some blue fabrics for our center star. So this one is going to be one of our red fabrics, and it's really fun. So the way we're going to cut these is I kind of go this way, and then they're cut across going on there. So your stripe is going to go the length of the strip. So you might want to have this one on top so you can do your best to like cut it square so you don't have a crooked stripe. But this one is really, really fun. This one really fits the red really well. It's really going to look very nice and bold when you put that in your quilt. This one reminds me of a picnic tablecloth. It's very summery to me, and it's going to look great in a patriotic quilt. This one looks like fireworks bursting out with our stars at the outside. Again, perfect for a patriotic quilt. And the design is on the smaller side, so it's going to look great in our skinny strips. We also have some statues of liberty on here, and it actually is going to get cut so that they're going this way. But remember that we're going to be changing these blocks in the orientation. So if you want to get it so that all of these guys are facing up when you're choosing your layout, you absolutely can make that happen. And if not, you know, it's okay. That will look good no matter what. All right, now we are moving on to our blues. This one is really fun. It's got that dark navy background with red, blue, and white confetti dots everywhere. Very patriotic looking. Now we've got some fireworks, and they're on a very small scale, so they definitely are going to work in our small blocks that are going to be in the center making up those flying geese. And last but not least, for our blocks and the fat quarters that go into it, we have another of our Statue of Liberty, this time with a blue background. All right, here's where things are going to change a little bit depending on which kit you choose. For one of them, you're going to have this stripe for your first border, and it will go this way, so you want to make sure you fussy cut that so it's nice and straight. And for the other one, it's going to be the star fabric where we have our red and blue stars. So this one will be lighter, and this one will just be more stripes. So if you are somebody who doesn't want to worry about fussy cutting to make sure that this is nice and straight, go with the stars. It'll look great no matter where it is. This one, you do want to take a little bit extra time to make sure that your ruler is nice and square with the stripes on there. And then for binding, this is where we switch it up again. This one that goes with the star, you're going to have that gingham check for your binding in blue, and it's going to go really well with our border fabric, which we'll take a peek at in a second. And this will just look great. It will look like you've done it on the bias. Even, you know, you're going to cut it on straight of grain, it'll look great. For this one, we have that confetti print again. Just this time we have a white border, so it's going to be a little bit lighter binding. So this is going to be one, maybe if you don't have kids, pets, dogs, husbands who spill coffee, you know, all those things. Maybe you're the one who spills coffee. This is one that you're going to want if you don't have those things in your life, because it's less likely to get dirty. But both of them look great. It'll be super fun. And then this is our border fabric for all of them. We have this really cool exploding firework star. So that's going to look great as our outer border. So here's kind of your sneak peek of how it's going to look. We'll have our inner skinny border with these prints here, depending on which variation you choose. Then we have our larger second border that has our exploding fireworks. And then we're going to have just a little bit, a peak of binding. And again, this is one variation, this is another variation. So just pick, there are digital images of both of the quilts on the product. You can pick which one you want. And then we're going to take one look at our background fabric. We're going to zoom in because it's a white on white that has stars. It's perfect. It's just this really amazing, subtle print. It's a white on white, and so you really don't see it until you're really close on it, but it looks absolutely fantastic. So this is going to be fun. You got that patriotic theme throughout. And remember, there's also a couple of prints that I didn't show you, but you can check out. We'll put them on the swatches on the video when we edit everything together that were not included in the kit. So we've got a good chunk of those available. You can grab them right now, have your backing fabric ready to go, and you can whip this out by 4th of July. So this would be really fun. I love this quilt. I love mine. I still have it and use it. And I hope you guys enjoyed this pattern as well. And remember, don't listen to pressing your seams under. That was before I discovered the beauty that is pressing seams open. I highly suggest you do that for every seam in this quilt. All right, let's watch the replay of Stars and Stripes. This quilt calls for some log cabin strips, And so I'm going to show you how to cut those using the Marty Michelle method. What I've done is I've already cut this to 18 inches wide. This is a fat quarter that I folded over, so we can see here's my cut edge and here's my selvage edge, and I've just folded that over so those two meet, and then trimmed my sides to get them nice and square. If you use fat quarters, you're going to want to make sure that it's a true fat quarter, that it is at least 18 inches wide, and I don't recommend that you pre-wash because that might shrink it to too small to do this method with. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut these so that the strips are parallel with the selvage, and that helps make for a more stable strip when we're sewing the log cabin blocks together. So now I need to cut these to 1.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lay that out, my ruler, so that my edges are square with the edges of my fabric that I've already trimmed. And then I have my 1.5 inch mark, which is in just a little bit because I don't want to get that selvage or that fuzzy edge from where the fabric has been cut. I'm just going to take my rotary cutter, cut across. We can pull that up and you can see that that's cut through. Now because this is the first cut, I do need to square up this edge as well. So this time I'm just going to line my 1.5 inch line with that edge that I just cut and flip so that it's facing me. And then I can cut the rest and get rid of that selvage. We don't need it anymore. So from here on out it's pretty easy. We're just cutting every 1.5 inches to get the strips that we need for this fabric. So if you're using fat quarter bundles, you can actually layer them up. You can do several at a time and cut through. I've cut through as many as 4 at a time to do this. And then they're kind of already mixed up a little bit when you go to sew in the next step, so that's kind of fun. You don't have to worry about making it look scrappy. It kind of is already like that. So just go ahead and keep cutting until you run out of room in your fat quarter. But once you're going to do that, then we can cut them for the actual log cabin strips. So you're going to want to refer to your instructions, which you can download at quiltaddictsanonymous.com, to make sure that you're cutting these to the right width. Now here's where the magic happens. So I have 11.5 inches here that I have lined up. So I'm cutting a strip that's 1.5 inches wide by 11.5 inches. And now when I pull this other strip up, then I have 6.5 inch strip because 11.5 plus 6.5 equals 18. So now here's where more magic happens. So now I need to cut at 10.5 to get this next strip. So I've got my 10.5 lined up with my edge, and then I have an inch line all along the top of that strip. Go ahead and cut right where that ruler ends. And now we have our 10.5 strip and our 7.5 strip again, because 10.5 plus 7.5 equals 18. You guessed it, we're going to do this one more time. This time I'm lining up at 9.5. Going to cut that strip. And now we have an 8.5 inch piece as well. So now we've cut all the fabrics for actually 2 of the blocks, and you're going to want to do this with your yardage or your scrap pile so that you have a bunch of these to choose from when we do the log cabin strips. And then we're also going to do this for the white fabric that is the neutral for this, but the measurements are different. So again, make sure you go to your printable instructions at quiltaddictsanonymous.com and purchase those, so that way you make sure you cut everything to the right size and you're not wanting to shoot yourself because you got the wrong, you have to get more fabric because you cut it wrong. So go check those out and then come on back and we're going to make the center star. We're going to use a no waste flying geese method to make this block. And so what we're going to need is 1 of the white squares and 4 of the blue squares in the Patriotic fabric. Make sure you get your instructions at quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Just get the stars and stripes pattern and you'll be able to know what size and how many you need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the smaller blue fabrics so that the wrong side is up. And I'm going to draw a line from point to point on the wrong side here. And you can kind of see that that's kind of a busier fabric. And I'm just going to do it with 2 of these for now so that you can see what we're doing here. And if you've never made flying geese using this method before, I think you're going to really like it. There's no waste, and I think it's a lot more accurate than the traditional way of making flying geese. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to line these up so that the smaller blue squares are right in the corner of this larger white square, and they're going to overlap a little bit in the center. You want them to do that. And ideally these lines are going to match up as well. So now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a scant 1/4 inch down either side of these drawn lines. If you want to, you can pin these in place, but it's not necessary. So I have everything lined up in my sewing machine, and now I'm just going to sew that scant 1/4 inch seam down both sides of that drawn line. We're going to come back over to the cutting board, and we're going to cut these apart right on that drawn line. And it's not important that you're super accurate here, but you also don't want to get too skinny on either one of these seams because it could pop open on the long arm if you do that. So now you're going to take these pieces that we've just cut apart, and we're going to press them so that the small blue triangles are going away from the larger white triangle. And if you're doing it right, it's going to look like a heart at this point. Just get that other one real quick. Okay. So now we need to draw lines on the wrong side of our other two squares for this unit. And it might be a little hard for you guys to see these lines at home, but what matters is that you can see them on your sewing machine. Got that line. Let's do one more. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your little heart shape here, and you're going to lay your square again so it's even with that edge of that larger white triangle, and you want your line going up so that it's in between these two heart shapes. And then we're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam down either side of this drawn line. Now I'm going to draw on my seam line so that it comes up a little clearer here. But if you've done this right, then your seam line is going to be coming out right where this little valley is, where these two triangles come together. So now it's time to cut these apart. Again, we're just going to cut it apart right on that drawn line, and accuracy, again, still isn't super important, but you do want to make sure that your seam doesn't get too skinny. So now when you flip these open, you can see that we have some flying geese units, and you're going to get 4 for every one big white square and 4 little blue squares. So I'm going to press these open, and then we're going to trim them to size. Press that good and flat. That'll help get a more accurate piece a little bit later. So now I need to trim this up, and I need to trim it so that it is 3.5 inches wide and 2 inches tall. And if you're a little off, that's okay. You'll be able to fudge that in a little bit later. I am a little skinny with this one, and that's going to be just fine. So what I'm looking for is that my 2-inch line is meeting up with these points, and that my 1/2 inch line, or my 1/4 inch line rather, is pretty much right where the top of my large triangle is. And once I've got that arranged, then I'm just going to trim, and I'm not trimming off a whole lot. The math is pretty right on for these. But, you know, you may have a little bit of jog ears to trim off here. So now what I'm looking for is I'm making sure that my 45-degree line is right on where these seams come together. And if I'm also still making sure that my point here is right where these fabrics come together, and same here. So I'm going to do a little trimming, pull that off, and now we have a pretty darn close to perfect flying geese unit, and once it's all sewn together, you won't even be able to tell that this is just a hair skinny. Now you're going to lay out the pieces for the rest of your star for the center of our block, and from here it's basically like putting together a 9 patch, even though all the pieces aren't the same size in each row. So what you're going to do is I like to just do it row by row. So I'll just pull those two together, line them up, and at this point we can just use a regular 1/4 inch stitch. We don't need to use a scant 1/4 inch stitch anymore. So I'll just sew that one on. I typically bring it back to the center just to make sure that I'm putting the right piece on the next part. That always helped me from having to rip out stitches later. Nobody likes to do that. Then you just keep going down. You know, we've got that top row done, so now we can grab the pieces for the second row. Line those babies up. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you can see how I sew here. So one of the secrets to getting your flying geese points in it right where you want them to be is to sew just 1 needle width to the right of where your threads make a little X on that point. I'm going to take my pen and just go over the seam lines here so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm outlining where the seams come together and make a little X where your flying geese units are. Now I've sewn so that I'm just 1 needle width to the right of where that X is. So now when I flip this open, I've got a perfect point on my flying geese unit. So that's the trick. Make sure you do that on all of them. So go ahead and sew the rest of your rows together, then we're going to press this so that way all of our rows will fit together nicely. So a lot of times you'll hear me and other quilt instructors say that you don't want to press so that a seam is underneath white because it would be a shadow. And that's true most of the time. But in this case, we want to think about what is going to be the easiest way for the fabric to stay flat. So in this case, we are going to press so that that seam allowance is underneath the white because it's going to be better overall for the block, and you'll see why in just a second here. So press that seam. So now for the second piece, I'm going to press so that my fabric is going underneath this big square because it's going to lay a lot flatter than if I tried to press underneath that flying geese unit where we have all those seams coming together right in the center. Go ahead and do the second side here. And here's why this is important to make that change here. So now when I flip these together, my seams are going to be going in the opposite direction, which is going to make it really easy to pin these together to sew them, get a really nice join. So I can just go ahead and grab the pins and show you what I mean there. So I'm going to put a pin right in the right side of that seam allowance here. And now my seams are just butted up next to each other. They're going in opposite directions, so this is going to make for a really great join when I put it through the sewing machine. So I'm going to sew this together so you can see how great of a join you'll get when you take the time to press your seams in opposite directions. And I'm still paying attention to where that X is on my flying geese unit so that I can have great points on my star. right, take this back over to the ironing board. And actually in this case, let's see. Yeah, let's go ahead and press that this way. And you can just see how great these points are coming together, and as well as my flying keys, because we really have taken the time to pin those nicely and sew in a really great spot. So go ahead and do that for your other side, and then your center star is done. Now we're going to start attaching the log cabin strips to our piece here. And I've got everything laid out here. Make sure you also refer to your layout instructions in the pattern that goes along with this. You can get it at quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Now the next thing we need to do is attach our log cabin strips to our center star. So that's what gives it that stars and stripes look, hence the name of the pattern. So I've got everything laid out here, and make sure you refer to your pattern instructions. It'll have step-by-step instructions on which piece to attach when. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and pull my top piece down and line that up. And there really isn't a top or bottom to your star, so you don't have to worry, you know, if it's a little off a little. So I'm going to and sew that top piece on. Now we're going to take it over to the ironing surface. Press that up. We're going to lay that back in place and pull over our next piece. And there are very detailed instructions on which piece to attach when on your pattern. So we're really just going to keep going around and around. I'm going to do this first one with you guys, and then we're going to do some fast forward for the rest of the block so you can see how it goes together. So what I like to do is just line up, get the first few stitches in, and then line up the back. Get those two corners together. But it shouldn't really be too different. These strips should really be the exact size you need them to be because we cut them parallel to that selvage. It makes it a lot more stable when you're using strips. Go ahead and press that. And we're pressing out for every single one that we have from here on out. We'll be pressing out. Lay that back down in place and grab our next piece. Bring it over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew again. So I've got everything laid back where it's supposed to go, and now we're going to put our last piece on for our first row. And now, whenever you're putting the next piece on, there's going to be two seams on the one that you're going for, for those log cabin strips. So here there's one, here there's one, here there's two. So we now know that this is the one that's the next size. It can get a little confusing sometimes because you've got a couple that are the same size. Alright, so we've got our first one on. Now we're just going to keep going round and round. I'm going to go ahead and leave the camera running and do a fast forward so you guys can see how it works. Well, this is it. This is the block for the Stars and Stripes pattern. When you put this together with all the others, that's what makes the sort of wavy stripe pattern for the quilt. The pattern is now available for individual sale, so you can do it to make a pattern patriotic quilt for yourself, or you can do it for the Quilts of Valor Foundation. Thanks so much for following along. Visit quiltaddictsanonymous.com to get this pattern, and happy quilting!